This is a solution to the production budget exercise we did in class. The first step is to create a revenues budget. The revenues budget is just the price times the quantity for each of the products. You can see the results here. I'm working out the finished goods inventory so as to determine the amount of production. And you can see what I've left blank are the number of units produced. So in the case of sprockets, the answer is 33,000, and in the case of cogs, the answer is 48,000. In order to show the production requirements, I'll go through direct material 1 in detail. We saw last time there would be 33,000 sprockets and 48,000 cogs that needed to be produced. Each sprocket uses 3 units of direct material 1, so 33,000 times 3 equals 99,000, and we can see the answer right there. Now, direct material 1 is also used in cogs. There are 48,000 cogs to be produced, and each cog uses 2 units of direct material 1, so there's the 2, and we get 96,000 units, and we can see that right over here. The total amount of direct material 1 that's going to be used in production is the 99,000 used for sprockets and the 96,000 used for cogs. That adds up to 195,000 units of direct material 1. Similar calculations are done for direct materials 2, labor 1, and labor 2. On the last slide, we saw that labor 1 used 12,900 hours and labor 2 used 17,700 hours. The rate for labor 1 is $25. The rate for labor 2 is $30. 12,900 times $25 is $322,500. 17,700 hours at $30 an hour is $531,000. If you add the two together, you see the labor budget is $853,500. Now we're going to take a look at the raw materials purchases budget. I'm just going to work through direct materials 1. We started off with 195,000 units as being the requirement for material 1. So this would be a credit to the raw material for direct material 1. The problem says the ending inventory is 14,000, and we put that into our T account. The beginning inventory is 10,000, and we put that into our account. Now we're ready to calculate the purchase. And what is needed then is 199,000 units in order to balance the accounts. So regarding the actual purchases, we have 199,000 units at 50 cents each, so multiply those together, and we end up with $99,500. For raw materials 2, we can go through the same process and calculate that 261,000 units need to be purchased at 20 cents each, and that will equal 52,200. If we add the two together, we see the total budget for purchases is 151,700. There are two types of variable overhead. Variable overhead 1 is based on $1.75 for each dollar of materials. Variable overhead 2 is $8 per hour of direct labor. So for sprockets, there were 99,000 units of material 1 and 66,000 units of material 2. And I have a work in process account here for sprockets. And direct material 1, we can see was 99,000 at 50 cents each. So that gets us to 49,500. Direct materials for 2 was 66,000 times 0.2, or 13,200. So the total then for direct materials is $62,700. If we multiply that by $1.75, we then see that the amount of overhead for variable overhead 1 is $109,725. Direct labor, on the other hand, once again, direct labor 1, direct labor 2, each was 3,300 hours. So we add those up, and we end up at 6,600 hours, $8 per hour, or a total of 52,800. I also showed you a different way of calculating it. This one might be a little obscure, but essentially I just combined some of the multiplications. So instead of taking, for example, 99,000 times 50 cents, and as I did over here, and then multiplying it by $1.75 later, I took the 50 cents times the $1.75 and came up with a factor of 0.875. I could then multiply the 99,000 times the 0.875 and come up with 86,625. Different factor of 0.35 for material 2. Notice that if I add these two numbers together, I'm still going to end up back at $109,725. Fixed overhead is a little bit easier. It's based on total direct labor hours. So the total direct labor hours were 6,600 for sprockets and 2,400 for cogs. If you add the two together, we end up with 30,600. Now, as a proportion then, sprockets are 21.57% and cogs are 78.43%. The budgeted fixed overhead was $800,000, so the allocation is sprockets $172,549 and cogs $627,451. The problem is slightly simplified by the fact that there's no beginning or ending work in process inventory. Here are all of the costs for the sprockets, and then over here for the cogs. And essentially I've gone through all of our budgets, materials, labor, fixed overhead, variable overhead, summed everything up, and then divided by the number of units produced, which is 33,000 in the case of sprockets and 48,000 in the case of cogs. This gives us a unit cost of $17.55 for sprockets, $36.02 for cogs. Now we're in a position to finish off the problem. We have the revenues from the prior calculation for sprockets, $1,050,000, for cogs, $3 million. Now we need to use FIFO, and remember that we're going to have 30,000 units of sales for sprockets, 50,000 units for cogs. We have a beginning inventory of 5,000 at $18 and 6,000 at $35 for each of the two products. 5 times 18 gives us the 90,000. 6 times 35 gives us the 210,000. The remainder then, we have 25,000 units, and we're going to value those at $17.55. I worked that out to $438,844. If you add these two together, we get a FIFO cost of goods sold of $528,844. Now in the case of cogs, $6,000 at $35. The remaining $44,000 are at the new price, which was just slightly over $36, and that gets us to a cost of goods sold of $1,794,963. We then have gross margins for each of the two products, and of course we can do it for the company overall.